In the dense, humid heart of rural Alabama, where the kudzu vines choke the life from forgotten barns and the air hangs thick with the scent of pine and decay, some stories are not meant to be told. They are meant to be whispered, passed down from one generation to the next, like a cursed heirloom. They exist in the sidelong glances of neighbors, in the hushed warnings to children who wander too close to the woods, and in the chilling silence that falls over a porch when a certain family name is mentioned. For decades, the darkest of these legends belonged to the Blackwoods of Hollow Creek, a tale of isolation so profound and a secret so grotesque that it stained the very soil of the land they occupied. The story always started the same way, with a question that had no righteous answer. How could a sister give birth to her own brother's child? The central mystery was not merely a rumor, it was a ghost that haunted the county. It was a story that defied the laws of God and man, a chilling narrative of a family that had walled itself off from the world, breeding its secrets and its sorrows in the shadows of the tall pines. The Blackwood name became a cautionary tale, a synonym for the horrors that fester in seclusion. And as the years turned to decades, the whispers grew, weaving a tapestry of folklore so dark and intricate that the truth seemed forever lost within its threads. But the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of clawing its way to the surface. This is the story of how that truth was unearthed, revealing a multi-generational tragedy that was far more disturbing than any legend could ever convey. What follows is not just folklore, it is the documented, painstaking reconstruction of a family's descent into a genetic and moral abyss, a case that would challenge the boundaries of medicine, law, and human compassion. It is the story of the Blackwood curse, a saga of blood and silence that began with a patriarch's twisted vision of purity and ended with a discovery that would horrify a nation and rewrite the textbooks on human genetics. We will uncover the classified records, the forgotten testimonies, and the scientific evidence that brought this family's chilling secret into the unforgiving light of day. The Blackwood property was a geographical fortress, nestled deep within a pocket of the Talladega National Forest, in a region locals simply called Hollow Creek. It was not a town, but a depression in the landscape, a place where the sun arrived late and left early. A single, treacherous dirt road, often washed out by Alabama's torrential rains, was the only artery connecting it to the outside world, and even that seemed to actively discourage travel. The land itself was a co-conspirator in the family's isolation. Steep, wooded hills formed a natural wall on three sides, while a swampy, snake-infested creek bordered the fourth. For generations, this geography had been the Blackwoods' greatest ally, a silent guardian of their self-imposed exile. Within this perimeter, they had cultivated a world entirely their own, governed by their own laws and traditions, completely divorced from the progress and oversight of the 20th century. The genesis of this isolation began in the late 1880s with Jedediah Blackwood, a man whose piety was matched only by his paranoia. A fire and brimstone preacher of his own invention, he saw the burgeoning modern world as a new Sodom, a place of rampant sin, industrial filth, and corrupting influences. Following a bitter dispute with his local church, which he accused of becoming soft and worldly, Jedediah gathered his wife and their 7 children and retreated into the untamed wilderness of Hollow Creek. He purchased over 500 acres of unforgiving land, declaring it a sanctuary, a new Eden where his bloodline could remain pure and untainted by the pestilence of society. His vision was absolute and his word was law. Jedediah established a doctrine that would become the cornerstone of the Blackwood existence for the next century. The first and most sacred rule was complete separation. No member of the family was permitted to leave the property without his express permission, which was never granted. No outsiders were to be welcomed. Education was limited to the King James Bible, which Jedediah interpreted with a terrifying literalism and the practical skills needed to survive off the land. But it was his second decree that sealed the family's tragic fate. To maintain the purity of their bloodline, to keep it from being sullied by the flawed genetics and corrupted souls of outsiders, all marriages were to take place within the family. cousins were to marry cousins. As the first generation gave way to the second, the pool of acceptable partners shrank, and the mandate became ever more twisted. The bloodline, Jedediah preached, was a sacred vessel, and to mix it with the blood of the world was the ultimate blasphemy. He was building a fortress, not of stone, but of flesh and blood. The first crack in this fortress appeared not with a bang, but with the quiet, methodical knock of bureaucracy. In the spring of 1968, a young, determined census-taker named Elias Thorne was assigned the thankless task of enumerating the most remote and resistant corners of the county. The Blackwood property was the last and most dreaded name on his list. Armed with a county map and a healthy dose of skepticism about the local legends he'd been told, he navigated the treacherous road into Hollow Creek. The moment he broke through the tree line and saw the collection of dilapidated cabins, a profound sense of unease settled over him. It was the silence that struck him first, an unnatural, heavy quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of a rural homestead. There were no barking dogs, no clucking chickens, no sounds of children playing. Elias Thorne's initial observations were deeply unsettling. As a figure emerged from the largest cabin, he saw a man who looked both ancient and ageless. This was Silas Blackwood, Jedediah's grandson and the current patriarch. His face was a roadmap of hardship, but it was his eyes, pale, watchful, and devoid of warmth, that Thorne would later remember most vividly. As other family members hesitantly appeared in the doorways of the surrounding cabins, Thorne noticed a disturbing pattern of physical similarities. It was more than just family resemblance. Many shared the same slightly wide-set eyes, the same low-set ears, and a peculiar shape to their skulls. Several of the younger members moved with a shuffling gait, their limbs seemingly uncoordinated. He saw a young woman, perhaps no older than 16, cradling a baby with a misshapen head and vacant eyes. The air of neglect was palpable, but it was overshadowed by a pervasive sense of dysfunction that he couldn't quite name. When Elias Thorne attempted to conduct the census, he was met with a wall of silent hostility. Silas Blackwood was the sole speaker, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He refused to give names, ages, or even a total count of the people living on the property. "We are Blackwood," he stated, as if that single word explained everything. "We count our own souls. The government has no business here." Thorne pressed, explaining it was his legal duty, but Silas was immovable. His answers were evasive and laced with a quiet menace. He denied the existence of any children under the age of 10, despite the fact that Thorne could clearly see several. He claimed they were self-sufficient, needing nothing from the outside world. The encounter lasted less than 15 minutes, but it left an indelible mark on the young census-taker. He drove away from Hollow Creek with a chilling certainty. The legends were not just stories. Something was profoundly and horribly wrong with the Blackwood family. Elias Thorne's official report was an anomaly, a stark outlier in a sea of routine data collection. He flagged the Blackwood household with a note expressing grave concern, citing extreme isolation, signs of potential neglect, and a refusal to cooperate. He specifically mentioned the unusual physical characteristics prevalent among the family members and the patriarch's hostile denial of the presence of young children. This report, usually destined for a dusty archive, landed on the desk of a county health official who, troubled by its contents, forwarded it to the office of the county sheriff and to Dr. Alistair Finch, a physician at the regional hospital known for his work with rural communities. A formal, multi-agency investigation was quietly initiated. The initial phase of the investigation focused on what wasn't there. Dr. Finch and Sheriff Brody began by searching for official records. They found nothing. There were no birth certificates for any Blackwoods born after 1910. There were no death certificates, no marriage licenses, no school enrollment forms, no tax records. It was as if, for over half a century, the family had ceased to exist in the eyes of the state. They were ghosts living on a patch of forgotten land. Dr. Finch began to suspect the physical traits Thorne had described were indicative of congenital disorders, often associated with recessive genes that become expressed through consanguineous relationships. He cross-referenced his nascent theory with old medical archives and found a single, cryptic entry from 1932. A doctor had been called to the edge of the Blackwood property to treat a young man for a severe logging injury. The doctor's notes mentioned the family's refusal to let him onto the land and his observation of familial craniofacial dysmorphism in the boy's siblings. It was the first piece of documentary evidence corroborating Thorne's fears. The investigation stalled for weeks, blocked by the family's impenetrable wall of silence and the legal complexities of entering private property without a clear criminal predicate. The breakthrough came from within. One night, a teenage girl, her feet bloody and her clothes torn, stumbled out of the woods and onto the highway, flagging down a passing truck. Her name was Martha, and she was Silas Blackwood's 16-year-old sister. She was terrified, malnourished, and pregnant. She had escaped. At the county hospital, under the gentle questioning of Dr. Finch, Martha's story began to unravel the dark tapestry of the Blackwood family. She spoke of a life of absolute control under Silas, where every aspect of their existence was dictated by the old ways established by Jedediah. She confirmed the practice of internal marriage, speaking of it as a normal, God-ordained duty. She described breeding pairings arranged by Silas to keep the bloodline strong. And she revealed the legend that had haunted the county for decades was true. The baby she carried was her brother's child, not Silas, but her other, older brother, Caleb. It was her duty, she had been taught, to provide a child for him. Martha's testimony transformed the investigation. The scope of the horror was expanding with every word she spoke. She told Dr. Finch and a horrified Sheriff Brody about the special children, the ones born with severe physical deformities or intellectual disabilities. These children, she explained, were often kept hidden in a small, windowless cabin at the far end of the property. She called it the Quiet House. She also spoke of the babies who didn't survive long after birth, the ones who were too weak for this world. They weren't given proper burials, she whispered. They were wrapped in cloth and buried by the patriarch in the old apple orchard behind the main house. With Martha's chilling confession, the authorities now had more than enough cause to act. They secured a warrant to search the entire Blackwood property, assembling a team of social workers, medical professionals, and law enforcement officers for what they knew would be a deeply traumatic and unprecedented intervention. The scientific confirmation of the family's secret was as swift as it was damning. Blood samples were taken from Martha and later from all the members of the family removed from the property. They were sent to a state genetics laboratory for analysis. The results that came back were staggering. A geneticist assigned to the case, Dr. Evelyn Reed, reported that the level of consanguinity within the Blackwood family was unlike anything she had ever seen in a North American population. The genetic markers showed multiple, overlapping, multi-generational incestuous relationships. Siblings had children with siblings. Uncles had children with their nieces. First cousins having children was the norm, not the exception. The family's collective genome was, in her words, a closed genetic loop, where recessive genes for debilitating and rare disorders had been amplified over generations with devastating consequences. She identified markers for Apert syndrome, a severe congenital disorder characterized by malformations of the skull, face, hands, and feet, which explained the familial craniofacial dysmorphism noted decades earlier. The legend was no longer a matter of folklore, it was a matter of scientific fact, written in the very DNA of the Blackwood family. The most grotesque element of the family's history was discovered during a painstaking excavation of the apple orchard Martha had described. Forensic anthropologists, guided by ground-penetrating radar, began to unearth a series of small, unmarked graves. The work was slow and somber. As the days wore on, the number of discoveries grew. They found 5 graves, then 10, then 20. By the time the excavation was complete, they had recovered the skeletal remains of 47 infants and young children. The forensic analysis of the tiny bones painted a horrific picture of the genetic curse that had plagued the Blackwoods for a century. The skeletons showed evidence of a litany of congenital disorders: hydrocephalus, anencephaly, cleft palates, fused fingers and toes, and the severe skull deformities characteristic of Apert syndrome. These were the weak children, the ones who had been quietly disposed of, their short, painful lives erased from the family's history. This hidden cemetery was the ultimate, heartbreaking testament to Jedediah Blackwood's doctrine of purity. While the scientific and forensic evidence provided the objective proof, it was the discovery of a hidden journal that gave a voice to the madness behind it all. Tucked away in a loose floorboard in the main cabin, investigators found a leather-bound ledger. It was the diary of Jedediah Blackwood, dating from 1889 to 1921. His elegant, looping script detailed his fanatical beliefs and the rigid enforcement of his rules. He wrote, not with the tone of a tyrant, but with the chilling conviction of a holy man. He saw his family not as prisoners, but as the last remnant of a pure humanity. In one particularly disturbing entry from 1905, after arranging the marriage of his own son to his daughter, he wrote, "The world outside pollutes itself with strange blood. They weaken the vessel God has given them. Here, in this hollow, we shall keep the vessel clean. Our blood is a fortress, and its walls must never be breached. Let the children of my children be the fruit of this sacred union, a testament to our strength and our separation from the fallen world." The diary was the confession of the ghost who had started it all, a first-person account of the twisted logic that had condemned generations of his descendants to a living hell. The official intervention at Hollow Creek was a delicate and chaotic operation. A convoy of police cars and vans from the Department of Human Services rumbled down the dirt road, shattering the century-long silence. The Blackwoods, numbering 29 in total, were found scattered among the decaying cabins. Their reactions ranged from fearful compliance to confused, passive resistance. For people who had never seen a television, never spoken on a telephone, and never interacted with anyone outside their own bloodline, the influx of uniformed officers and social workers was an alien invasion. They were removed from the only world they had ever known and transported to hospitals and temporary state facilities. The rescue for many was as traumatic as the life they had left behind. The medical and psychological evaluations that followed catalogued the devastating human cost of generations of inbreeding and isolation. The physical toll was immediately apparent. Over 80% of the family members presented with at least one significant genetic condition, ranging from treatable issues like congenital heart defects and vision problems to severe life-altering skeletal deformities and neurological disorders. The special children from the quiet house, 4 of them, ranging in age from 8 to 19, were found to have profound physical and intellectual disabilities, unable to speak or care for themselves. The psychological damage was even more pervasive. Psychiatrists diagnosed complex post-traumatic stress disorder, severe social anxiety, and a condition they termed environmental deprivation syndrome. The Blackwoods had no concept of money, modern society, or basic social norms. Their language was a strange, stunted dialect of English, and their emotional development was, in many cases, arrested at a childlike level. The legal ramifications of the Blackwood case proved to be a labyrinth of unprecedented challenges. Criminal charges were brought against the patriarch Silas for abuse, neglect, and incest. However, his court-appointed defense argued that he, too, was a victim of his upbringing, a man with profound intellectual deficits who was merely perpetuating the only system he had ever known. Was he a criminal mastermind or a product of a monstrous environment? The question of culpability was murky. Ultimately, Silas was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial and was committed to a secure state psychiatric hospital, where he would remain for the rest of his life. For the other adult members who had participated in incestuous relationships, the state declined to prosecute, viewing them as victims incapable of giving meaningful consent. The most complex legal battle involved establishing identities for the children, who had no legal existence and whose parentage was a tangled web of forbidden relationships. The process of integrating the Blackwood family into the modern world was a long, arduous, and often heartbreaking journey. The younger children, with their greater neuroplasticity, adapted best. Placed in foster care and specialized schools, many learn to read, write, and form relationships outside the toxic confines of their family. They slowly, painstakingly, built new lives. For the adults, the transition was far more difficult. They struggled with the noise, the pace, and the complexities of a society they could not comprehend. Some remained in state-run group homes for their entire lives, more comfortable in a structured institutional environment than in the frightening freedom of the outside world. They were forever caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. 20 years after the intervention, the legacy of the Blackwoods was a mosaic of tragedy and fragile hope. The property at Hollow Creek was seized by the state and eventually reclaimed by the forest, the cabins slowly rotting back into the earth, the apple orchard growing wild over its terrible secrets. Martha, the girl whose escape had broken the silence, became the family's most notable survivor. After giving birth to her son, Samuel, she worked tirelessly with therapists and educators. She eventually married a kind man from a nearby town, raised her son, and lived a quiet, deliberately normal life. She rarely spoke of her past, but her existence was a testament to a resilience she never knew she possessed. Her son, Samuel, born of incest but raised in love and normalcy, grew into a healthy young man, a living symbol that the cycle could, indeed, be broken. The Blackwood case had a profound societal and scientific impact. It became a landmark case study in the fields of clinical genetics, sociology, and social work, illustrating the catastrophic consequences of extreme isolation and prolonged inbreeding. The data gathered from the family's DNA provided invaluable insights into the function of recessive genes and the etiology of rare genetic disorders. For law enforcement and social services in rural areas, it served as a brutal lesson in the importance of investigating even the most outlandish rumors and reaching the most isolated populations. In the local community, the truth of the Blackwood family replaced the superstitious folklore. The story was no longer a ghost story to frighten children. It was a human tragedy that served as a somber reminder of a community's collective failure to see what was hidden in plain sight. In the end, the story of the Blackwoods is a dark and complex reflection on the nature of purity, the price of secrecy, and the devastating power of a single, flawed idea passed down through generations. It is a testament to the darkness that can fester when a family walls itself off from the world, and a chilling reminder that the most terrifying monsters are often the ones we create ourselves, forged in the crucible of fear and isolation. The whispers in Hollow Creek have faded, replaced by a more profound and sorrowful silence, the silence of a truth finally brought to light, a truth that, however painful, holds the only possibility of healing and the only promise that such a tragedy will never happen again.